It means all of us, always, everywhere. And what could be the more perfect vision and understanding of what human rights surely must be all about?
So we look at demographics, we look at census trends, things like that, housing markets, lots of mapping happens.
A new facility also means higher costs for electricity, water, heating, and general maintenance, which ensures a clean, safe, and comfortable environment for both our animals and our future staff.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki, Hogarth.
We begin this week with the St. Andrews Municipal Plan, which is in draft form. So it has no standing at the moment. It's just a draft document that they have presented both to council and had one public presentation so far.
Yes, that was the first of three planned for the area. It was here at the W.C. O'Neill Arena on Thursday night. Actually, it was a full house. We had to add more chairs to make sure that all the people that came out had proper seating. So it was great to see that much input from the community already at the first meeting. What were your takeaways from being there?
Yeah, so certainly, it's worth noting that a municipal plan is a 10-year guiding document for the development of land. And what we heard last night following the presentation, which we'll go through a little bit, was really generally just some good questions. Talking about short-term rentals, talking about how do I know if there's a development happening in my area? What is the difference between urban densification and high density, low density development, all of that. And those words are kind of strange for a place like St. Andrews. There's no real high density zones in St. Andrews. High density, we're talking, is relative to the community that you're in. High density in St. Andrews would mean something like the Argyle building downtown would be more high density than, say, some of the bungalow properties that exist. The Compass Housing building would be a higher density. The Anchor's Landing building is higher density. So that there was lots of really good questions, and I think it was a great dialogue. I think Alex explained himself, Alex Henderson, for those who are wondering, explained all of the concepts really well, and I think it was a great, engaging conversation.
There were a lot of great maps there that Alex brought, senior planner at the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission. It is interesting to see high density. I didn't realize I lived in a high density area too, but also with amalgamation. We have Bayside and Shamcook to consider now, so it was interesting to see the map of the region played out that way, where you have industrial areas, even in Bayside, and commercial zones for those kind of things as well.
Yeah, so it's important to note that the province has mandated local governments to redo their municipal plans post-amalgamation because they have incorporated new areas, new residents, and so the municipal plans have to reflect their way of life as well, and the geography in which they encompass. And as you mentioned, Bayside has a heavy industrial presence. The Bayside port is there. It has heavy agricultural presence. So, Shamcook has its own things that it needs to kind of be aware of. We're learning about priority of protection of the Shamcook Lake watershed drinking system. So it's mandated by the province to do. So that's why they're doing it so close to the last one.
Okay, and also they say every 10 years. It also takes into account the changes that happen organically, the evolution of the community itself, whether there is population growth, maybe new businesses to account for that change the way the landscape of the town interconnects with itself. Yeah,
so they established several key things that came out of what is a background study. So a background study is part of the process. They kind of have to look at census trends, demographics, population, and they do surveys as well. They had 200 responses to this survey when they did it, and Xander Gopin, the senior planner for the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission, considered that quite good, for that type of survey. And they established a few things that were common threads that they wanted to be part of this plan. The continued delivery of high public service and infrastructure, the protection and conservation of the physical environment, including the protection of the Shamcook drinking watershed, mitigation and adaptation of the impacts of climate change, including erosion and sea level rise, to develop housing that meets the needs of all residents, specifically housing that is affordable, the preservation of rural way of life, rural economic development, including the promotion of local agriculture, tourism that supports local residents and businesses without straining resources, and maintaining the historically significant character of St. Andrews.
Okay, and I know something like affordable housing, there can always be a question mark exactly on what does that mean. Was that dove into at all in last night's meeting?
I don't think anyone asked like a direct question about what does affordable housing mean. I think they looked at different types of housing. I think there was a conversation about property lots having 4 units on them, which is something that is a bit controversial in other places, but is being explored by different municipalities. But it is important to note that affordable is considered 30% of your gross income. So that's on a sliding scale. If you make more money, you can pay more for housing. If you make less money, you can actually, you need to pay less for housing, or you should pay less for housing. Should is the operative word here. And actually the lowest income bracket, which Alex pointed out in the meeting, would actually only be able to afford in St. Andrews about $437 for rent per month. And I don't think you're going to find a unit for $437 in St. Andrews.
Right. And I mean, I should bring up too, when you think about municipal plans and the need to update every 10 years, that takes into account things that technology brings into the forefront, such as things like Airbnb, right? This is a fairly new concept, but definitely it has impacts on tourism, the amount of people that come to the area, the amount of affordable rentals that are in place for people who want to live here year-round. I'm thinking students at NBCC, for instance. If a person who has a rental unit on their property then decides to Airbnb it, it doesn't mean it's necessarily available for an actual resident of the community. So these are questions that come into play and need to be addressed in moments like this.
Yeah, and certainly, we'll talk about Airbnb as it relates to tourism a little bit later as well, because the Airbnb question, or the short-term rental question, is not just Airbnb, it's Vrbo as well. Right. It's not regulated in New Brunswick, and so it's this mammoth of an issue that is causing problems at multiple facets of municipalities. And when you have a property that's built, but it's only built as a short-term rental, it takes away housing stock. Or if there's an apartment as part of a house and they decide to, instead do short-term rentals because they can make more money that way, that's another apartment gone that could potentially be used for a resident who wants to live here full-time. And so, but it is worth noting that St. Andrews has really kept pace with what the Southwest Service Commission believes it needs to be doing in terms of that development and in terms of the housing units that they need. I think they've completed pretty close to the amount that they set for themselves, whereas other places in Charlotte County have not. So that's certainly something to be proud of. It's a question of affordability. And he actually pointed to this wonderful tool developed by the University of British Columbia, which you can go online and you can pick New Brunswick and you can drill right down to each municipality, and it outlines to you, how much of the population makes this income, that income, how much, if you make this much money, how much rent could you afford if the definition is 30%. So, and my story online actually talks about specifically where most people fall, and you can take a look at that story at CHCO.TV.
Okay, and when you think about a community like St. Andrews as well, where we also have that factor of having these big historic homes, I understand the other side of Airbnb can be, this allows people to stay in those homes, to make them affordable. The upkeep of a home like that can be also very expensive especially when it's over 200 years old. So I understand the various points of views on short-term rentals as well, and how it can sustain a home that could potentially, with the amount of upkeep it takes, and this is a historic destination for many tourists as well, but the people who are charged with taking care of these homes have many expenses. So definitely interesting to consider the many sides to debates over short-term rentals, and then where things like bylaws come into place. Yeah,
exactly. And it's interesting as well. I will just note that the wharf did come up. I think it's the elephant in most rooms these days. It did come up because there is a section in the municipal plan that talks about the preservation of the shoreline. and some felt at that meeting that the project that is going forward currently directly contradicts that. So there were a couple of questions about how that document contradicts the plan set forth by the council. So it's interesting. I mean, it wasn't a question that Alex could answer because he's not a member of council. He's not making these decisions. But I think he explained that, these things, this is just a guiding document. It's not a binding document. So, and it could change before it gets to its final stage. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the tourism aspects of the municipal plan and our interview with Xander Gopin from the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission.
So we're pretty familiar with that, and we're familiar with some of the challenges that come from having plans that were created at a time when there wasn't a ton of development happening around.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
We are staying in St. Andrews to once again visit the municipal plan, but how it factors in tourism.
Yeah, so the two threads that I wanted to pull on, although there are many threads that are involved in this municipal plan, I could write 10 stories about all of the things that were mentioned in this plan. But I wanted to pull on the thread of tourism because this was actually my first full summer in St. Andrews, and boy, what an experience. And I was doing some research about, how many people actually come to St. Andrews, and that number is not easy to find. However, Tourism New Brunswick says about 80,000 people visit St. Andrews annually.
Wow, and I have a feeling that this year, when we see the data from 2025, it's going to paint an even bigger picture of tourism, would be my prediction, just because this year, we think back to COVID, when we had Canadians vacationing in their own country, how many people discovered St. Andrews and said this was their first time coming here. This year we had that again with the Elbows Up movement going on, plus we had all the Americans who wanted to have a break from their own politics, it seems, and come to Canada. And here we are 20 minutes outside of the U.S. border. So I have a feeling tourism will continue to grow. If they say 80,000, I think we'll see an increase. And I think this will continue for a while.
Yeah, it's and so one of the things that came out of this plan in particular was, maintaining tourism that doesn't strain local residents and resources. Mm-hmm. And what that means, essentially, and you will hear Xander Gopin talk about this in our interview, is if tourism is too much in the summer, if there's too many people coming here, too many cars on our roads, too many heavy RVs on our roads, and it's impacting the lives of the people who live here year round, then it's not as desirable. And that comes with the fact that this community, its entire economy is essentially based on tourism season. And so we talked a lot about how that actually creates problems of affordability. It creates problems and it's about striking a balance, right? Mm-hmm. We need to maintain the tourism economy. But we also need to keep in mind that people live here all year round and they have needs and wants and desires. And so we talked about the Airbnb, for example. He's a great example. A lot of people use Airbnbs to support their mortgage, mm-hmm. but also Airbnbs make affordability less. Lessens affordability. Mm-hmm. Things are more expensive at the grocery store. They're more expensive, to buy. General things are more expensive, but also there's less housing. So it drives up the price of housing that is available because people know that you need to rent it.
Exactly, and there is a big difference between having a unit in your house to make your home more affordable that you use as Airbnb, where we've seen, though, in other places in the world where someone could see the opportunity to buy multiple homes, turn them into multiple Airbnb units, which not only affects the housing market, but also has an impact on tourism operators, people that have inns, or even a big hotel. If the options are there with Airbnb, and there's a plethora of them, that really does impact the local offerings as well. So a lot to consider.
And I think that municipalities, the provincial government has commissioned a task force to look at how to regulate short-term rentals because it is such a problem across this country. It's not unique to St. Andrews. It's not unique to New Brunswick. It's across the country that we're seeing this issue, but it disproportionately impacts, rural communities and smaller municipalities because the housing stock is so incredibly low. But it is worth noting that, we spend a lot of our resources promoting summer tourism. But there is the question of, can we do this in the winter? Can we spread it out so that it's not all concentrated to the 5 months that we have in the summer and make it more appealing in the winter? A lot of the businesses shut down throughout the winter. Is there a way that we can spread the joy and the love of tourism throughout the year, not just in the summer?
As an active member of the St. Andrews by the Sea Christmas Committee, I would say there are great small groups in the community doing that, and I think we've seen the impact that you can have if you focus, especially it was a group of volunteers building a season that is the off season into something. It has extended. I've noticed with the Christmas Committee, there are more stores willing to stay open, all the way up to New Year's Eve. So how do we take the information we have with summer tourism and allow that to really influence where we go next with our tourism promotions?
Yeah, and it's going to require a lot of creativity because of the fact that, for decades, much of the shops downtown have closed in the winter. It's going to take collaboration. Sports tourism is also a big option in the winter. I spoke with former Mayor Brad Henderson about that exact thing. The W.C. O'Neill Arena is a great place. There's a curling club here. There's an arena here. It's a great opportunity to have families coming in for the weekend and spending their money in the downtown core, and staying at the Algonquin or staying at one of the lovely motels that are here. So I think we have to spread the love out a little bit, and that might be part of how we maintain and not strain our resources.
Yes, St. Andrews always has those interesting, unique circumstances of being such a heavy tourist location that you have more things to consider when you're doing these plans. And yeah, I think short-term rentals would be a really interesting one to watch going forward, because we've seen it in other cities around the world, how it can have an impact and very quickly if it's not addressed, but also how it can be a help, especially in historical towns such as this, to allow people to maintain these big homes, which is part of the draw of tourism too. I mean, there's historical home tours in this area, and I think of all the people that are able to, keep their homes in tip-top shape. That is part of the draw of the community as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit earlier about out of province people or out of country individuals purchasing properties to only have them as an Airbnb, and that really has to be part of the conversation about regulation. Like, we can't have someone from somewhere else buying a housing unit and never occupying it. And the municipal, last night, Alex was asked that question, and he said, it could be a matter of creating a bylaw that says, in the zoning bylaw or within the plan that, there's no, the only use for an Airbnb is secondary use. So you have to occupy your property. It cannot be an Airbnb only. So that's part of the question, but I think it has to be a big focus for both levels of government, because we have to get this under control. The housing crisis is only going to get worse because nothing is changing. So it's these plans are so fascinating to me. I'm sure everyone else is a little bit bored, but they're super fascinating, and they're really, I would encourage everyone to go ahead and take a look and read it.
Yeah, all right. Well, I look forward to learning more and seeing where that goes, because I think it really does have something to watch around the world. When you see especially waterfronts that get bought up and are used for these short-term rentals, and then in the off season there's just no one there, and it really takes away from the life of the community itself. There's also that trickle-down effect of, if it's not affordable, who will work in the community to serve the people when they come visit the town? Especially with gas being the prices that it is, we've seen how hard it is to just staff local restaurants, local stores, and things like that nature. So really, it is a big picture to consider the whole. And that's what this is really all about.
And just for the purpose of saying it, everybody deserves housing. Whether you're low income or high income, everybody deserves a safe place to call home. Let's take a listen to my interview with Xander Gopin.
It's specifically, the policies might get a little bit outside of land development, but that's really where it's focused. but it can also speak to other municipal bylaws, budgets, land, infrastructure, facilities, services, grants, or other programs. And the list of things that we're sort of considering when we are making a municipal plan, it's development and use of land, conservation and improvement of the physical environment, which includes climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, control and abatement of all forms of pollution of the natural environment, development of communication, utility, and transportation systems, reservation and projected use of land for municipal purposes, provision of municipal services and facilities, including sewage, water, solid waste, education, cultural institutions, recreational facilities, parks, playgrounds, open spaces, fire and police, cemeteries and crematoria, urban renewal, housing, preservation of buildings and sites of historical interest, facilities for the provision of health and social services, housing, including affordable housing and rental housing, coordination of programs of the council relating to the economic, social, and physical development of the municipality, and anything else the council thinks is relevant. So it's a lot of stuff. It's kind of everything. But there are certain things which the municipality is really directly involved in and is regulating. And then there's other things like educational institutions. The municipality is certainly involved in, and land needs to be zoned so those can exist. But ultimately, that's something that the province the province delivers that service. And this is a really good example of, and it's not actually like geographic data, but it's using data to have specific policies. I think in the previous municipal plan, or I guess the current one, it talks about we should have affordable housing, but it doesn't actually say what that means. So in this proposed municipal plan, it talks about prioritizing if council's going to be involved, because this is, mostly a plan for council. And so if they're going to be, like funding things, they should use data to make sure that the projects they are funding and their requirements for the rents on the other side, or the how much it costs to buy land or whatever it is, are actually going to meet the needs of the people who need it most. So in St. Andrews, and this data comes from its census data on area median household income, but there's a great research project out of UBC called it's HART, Housing Assessment Resource Tools, that is they've been funded by the federal government to do this research, and they've basically gotten custom data sets for every census subdivision, which is fantastic for people like me. So I can tell you what the number is in St. Andrews. I can tell you what it is in St. Stephen. I think I sent you that sheet, but and they categorize it by low income and very low income, and moderate income and median income and high income, and that's a certain percentage of the area median household income. So in St. Andrews, that's almost $95,000 a year. So there's also a metric for what percentage of that means affordable, and that happens to be 30%. And you can get into the minutia of like, why is that number the way it is? I can send you research papers on it. It's a general number. You got to pick something. So that, if 1/3 of your household budget is what you should be spending on your housing. Not true for everybody. Depends if you have kids, all these things, but pick something. So you take that number, and so for the median person who's like right in the middle in St. Andrews, that shelter cost per month is $2,374 based on the household income. And of course, there's more minutia here, like, well, what if it's a single person? You get more if you have a couple as a household, that they can put more to housing. They have more, if it's dual income. They don't have kids, they have more disposable income, things like that. But again, you have to pick something. So in St. Andrews, so 50% of that, which would be the low income category, where that cutoff is about $1,200 a month. Something that we hear a lot in public consultation, and we heard it, the last time we were involved in the municipal plan development in St. Andrews, is we understand that tourism is a really important part of our economy, but if it means that we can't enjoy our own town, then it's not actually good for us, and we don't want it. And I think there's definitely, there's a push and a pull between that, because if you have tourism and, people coming in, you can support things like the brewing company, which if you only had, the folks who are in St. Andrews in the winter, that might not be a viable business, but because you have the people in the summer, then we can enjoy it in the winter. So it's definitely that tension and that balance. And I think, short-term rentals is probably part of that. What is the healthy level of that? And there was, the town did look at strongly regulating short-term rentals. I think it was back in 2020, either 2020 or 2021, and ended up not going forward with a bylaw to regulate them. So it's left to the zoning bylaw. But I think that's something where, and you can see it in other parts of the world, where a country that, or a place that relies too heavily on tourism, you will get affordability issues for the people living there. I think it's hard to say exactly how short-term rentals are impacting the overall housing market, but I don't think you could say there's no impact. So trying to kind of balance that while understanding that, this is a way that people are traveling now, and a lot of folks use the income from short-term rentals to support their mortgages. So, again, it's trying to right size things, kind of like with the agriculture. It's not that different from the concept of how do you minimize the spillover effects onto other properties. And zoning is one way to do that. So if there's going to be, standalone tourism uses that aren't kind of associated with somebody also living on the property long term, those should be in a higher intensity zone, a higher intensity area. So and with hotels and like the Algonquin, like that's clearly a big thing that would have a big impact. There's lots of people, it has parking needs.
That was Xander Gopin, the senior planner for the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission.
We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to talk about my interview with Alex Neves, international human rights lawyer and this year's Massey lecturer.
So I think first and foremost, we need to find our feet again. And we have right now, I think, too much of a tendency, and this has been through both, I'm not being partisan here, we've seen this from both liberal and conservative governments over the last 25 years or so, that human rights that's a secondary consideration. It's nice words for the press release.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. Last week I had the pleasure of having Alex Neves here in the studio. He is this year's Massey lecturer, and his new book, Universal: Renewing Human Rights in a Fractured World, is out this September. So it was incredible to have him here in studio. The reason he was here in St. Andrews, he is a graduate of Sir James Dunn Academy. He grew up here. So many ties to our wonderful community, but such a special experience to have him come here. He said this was his first TV interview ahead of the lecture series. So very exciting to have him, and a very enlightening conversation. We dug into everything from Israel, Palestine, to trans rights, in the U.S. to things happening right here at home.
It was such a fascinating conversation. It's sometimes difficult to get so philosophical about all of the things that are wrong with our world, but I think if we're going to live through it, we have to talk about it.
And what better person than Alex Neves to have come in and have these conversations and to delve into them here. I know we focus on local here, but it doesn't mean a lot of these issues aren't on our minds. And when we think about things like trans rights, we are right on the U.S. border. I've been able to cover and be a part of different movements that have happened just in 2025 as we see rights for the trans community, especially in the U.S., start to erode from lights across the border in St. Stephen to Calais, Maine. That happened in January, right at the start of the Trump administration. So we can see that little communities like ours right here in Charlotte County can have an impact and can make statements. But it was wonderful to have that conversation with Alex.
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting points that he made, and I've watched this interview a couple of times, was that he said human rights is like a club. You're either in it or you're not in it. And unfortunately for not just millions, billions of people, they're not in it. And it's really unfortunate. And I was interested to see the examples that he talked about where inequalities exist. I think he talked about how, even just having air conditioning is something that would be considered a human right. Because it's so hot now all the time everywhere. So I was fascinated by some of the things that he said in terms of human rights and who they apply to and who they don't apply to.
When you think about the first half of the show, we're talking about the need to redo a municipal plan every 10 years. Things evolve. And then speaking with Alex, when you're looking at the globe and society on this massive scale and this universal scale, when we look at things like the climate crisis, this is factoring in a different way. Now, I even think, we didn't even touch on things like technology. How many people are left out when, you look downtown, there are no pay phones anymore. If you don't have a cell phone, you are left out of, even being able to call 911 at times. So there are many things that this day and age, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been thinking about in the same terms. So his book is really interesting for those reasons, and having the chance to have him in here to ask him questions was absolutely wonderful. What were some of the takeaways that really struck a chord with you?
So there were a few. I was interested in his conversation again about the Human Rights Club, and I was interested to hear him talk about locally and even in Canada, we still have a lot of work to do. Not everybody has a house. Not everybody is housed in this country, and we hear a lot of people talking about homelessness in their communities and the unhoused population. That is a basic human right that we don't have in Canada. The other thing that strikes me is even medical discrepancies. Certain medications cost a lot of money. Some medications are not covered by private insurance or public insurance. Medical technology, as you just mentioned, technology in general, there is disparity that exists in our own country that is extremely difficult to not only bear witness to, but be a bit unable to do anything about it. I think journalism is part of the fabric of how we change the conversation and how we present the facts to the public to make sure that they're able to see for themselves what's going on and give them a voice and a platform to talk about those things.
Yeah, definitely one of the threads throughout the entire conversation was this idea of the bystander, and it's not a new concept when we think back of things like World War II, and sometimes how your silence can be part of the problem when we think about oppression. So definitely that was a factor that he brought up today, and I think that that's sometimes how we feel as Canadians is, do we take a stand? What if we don't know enough? How do we even educate ourselves properly, especially in the era, again, misinformation? Now we have the factor of AI coming into play and not always knowing what we're hearing is true or not. So is looking at it through that lens as well that really struck a chord with me, because I think that we can all do something. And he said sometimes it's not necessarily that you have to speak up. You can be a part of local vigils. You can also give back in financial ways too if you're able to show your support that way. So there are many ways to get involved, but part of it also is about about education, finding those right sources of information so that you can be up to date with what's going on and not plead ignorance.
Well, that leads well into the second thing that he talked to, or one of the many things that he talked about that struck me, and that was about journalism itself. I hate to talk about ourselves in this context, but he talked about how journalism is under threat. It's not just under threat here in Canada, but if you think about in the United States, public radio is currently under threat of being defunded. You know, we hear it in Canada about the CBC, the public broadcaster. You know, it's a campaign promise, and it was a campaign promise from the Conservative Party of Canada to defund the CBC. These are all things that threaten journalism, and it is one of the pillars, as he said, of a functioning democracy. And I've certainly over time experienced, attacks. And he spoke about, the foundation of journalism itself is under threat, but journalists personally are being attacked as well. And I've experienced it working for the major networks, but I also experience it, even here locally. And some of it is not direct and forward. It's subtle. It's on social media. It's in my inbox. And so it's challenging. And I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge the 247 journalists in Gaza that have been killed since October of 2023. And more information is coming out in the mainstream media landscape about how these journalists are actually dying. And I watched a video from Al Jazeera, and many of them work for Al Jazeera or Al Gahad, but they also work for the Associated Press and Reuters as freelancers. And I watched a video of the Nassar Hospital, which was the most recent attack. And basically they were using the top part of that hospital as a place to get service, to send out video through a Dejero. Some people who are familiar with journalism will know that that's a transmitting device. And there was an initial strike at the top of the 4th floor of that hospital, and the Israeli Defense Force said that they were trying to attack a camera that was being used by Hamas, but in fact that was a Reuters live camera that was live streaming on the top of the building. And so the first strike had come, and then rescue workers and journalists went back up to the top to capture images, to pull people out of the rubble. And as that happening, 2 more bombs dropped, killing 5 people. And these are people who were soon to be husbands, they were fathers, their sisters, their daughters. And it kind of makes you realize that the pushback that we face here is a little bit trivial.
Yeah, it was definitely very, very interesting to talk to him about that level of what journalists are facing now. I mean, he also did talk about bad journalism and how that factors into even the way other journalists are treated too, especially when you look at countries like the United States, where you're allowed to be very opinionated on these national broadcasts, which, in our eyes is not proper journalism, but that factors in how journalists in general are treated, especially here in Canada, where a lot of Canadians tend to watch a lot of American news, whether you want it or not. It's part of your cable package. And so that can factor in how they see people in their own country, even if those aren't their ethics as they do their job. Especially I think when you do local news, the best thing you can do is just present the information, allow people to make up their own minds. That's what we do here. But again, yes, we've experienced it ourselves, and it definitely is. I know there's been times in my life it has been scary. I haven't had to have, I think for the most part, I feel very appreciated in this community, but there have been times that it has been scary.
Yeah, and it's hard for us. He talked a little bit about this, but it's hard for us to really keep ahead of the misinformation. And I think that's the biggest challenge. We're not allowed to post on Facebook anymore. So it's hard to keep ahead of that misinformation. But I was fascinated by that conversation. It's great to listen to him, and I would encourage everyone to go listen to it. It's a little bit longer than the normal Southwest Magazine, but it was worth every minute.
Here's my interview with international human rights lawyer and Massey lecturer, Alex Neame.
I think it's, one of the reasons why people maybe often shy away. Well, there's many reasons, but one reason that people shy away from kind of getting involved or taking a stand or speaking out is I think people often have this vision that you either have to be all in or nothing, right? That if you're going to do something, you're going to have to be, it's going to take up several hours a day, and you're going to have to be leading protest marches. And of course not. We need so many different ways for people to make their contribution. We can't all be leaders. If we were all leaders, it would be a disaster. There's so many different ways to play a role. And for some people, maybe it's writing a check. We need resources to fight these fights and wage these struggles, absolutely. For others, maybe financial support is an impossibility, but they've got people power. They can be the one who do show up at a protest. And this may not be some sort of big, high-profile protest march in front of Parliament. It may be just a handful of people who stand together in a vigil on a street corner in a small town, etc.
I will tell you, I saw it right in St. Stephen when they end of January, lights across the border, particularly for trans people. And what I was there for a news story. What I didn't expect to see was lights come back from the U.S. side. And every once in a while, you are brought to tears when you're doing the news. And that was one of those moments to see rural New Brunswick and Maine as well stand together in this moment.
And I think that idea of the lights coming back, that picks up on something so important that I think people are constantly surprised with when they do come out of their place of silence, when they do find their voice. Maybe it's also finding a bit of courage to take those first few steps, to write some letters, to call an MP, to show up for a protest, and then to suddenly find common cause and realize, I'm not alone. It's not just a handful of us. Even here in my small town, there are other people who feel the same and have the same sense of worry. And that is so, it's kind of a companion to solidarity. And I talk about this a lot in one of the lectures, empowerment, and what a force that is. What a force for good, what a force for change. And you get those two lined up together. Solidarity, we're together. Empowerment, we can do things, and we can change the world. Everything that is good in our world, every advance we've ever seen, going back to the abolition of slavery and to votes for women and, more recent things in Canada like same-sex marriage and the struggles around sexual and reproductive rights and the right to abortion, etc. All of those great advances have all been from the people. Not just because some wonderful government suddenly on their own decided, we will bestow rights. It all comes from that place of solidarity, empowerment, struggle, and refusing to stay silent.
When we look at something more complicated like Israel-Palestine, I think a lot of Canadians can feel overwhelmed by the topic. They fear they don't know enough to even put words out into the public sphere. How do you recommend people navigate understanding what's going on, but also, if they want to take a stand, do something that is meaningful and also helpful?
So I think there's different ways to become involved in what's happening in Israel-Palestine right now. Some of us, I'm a lawyer, I'm an international lawyer, so I tend to gravitate to campaigns and efforts that are very much focused on legal solutions. What can big UN bodies like the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court be doing? What does international law have to say about what's happening on the ground in Gaza? How can we ensure some accountability, etc.? And if people are drawn to, that's how they approach conflict, that's the kind of, that's more the justice and accountability agenda for our world. There are so many organizations, groups like, my former organization where I was previously the Secretary General, Amnesty International. Go on their website. The Canadian website is amnesty.ca. They have all sorts of learning materials, background reports, but also very importantly actions that people can take. And because it's the Canadian section of Amnesty International, it tends to be very focused on what can we be pressing our government to be doing. I think for other people, they approach this struggle as from a kind of a people-to-people perspective and are perhaps more drawn to some of the incredible efforts that are underway to build bridges between Jewish and Muslim, Israeli and Palestinian communities. And there's a lot of that out there. It's very inspiring to check out some of those resources. There's conferences involving speakers from both communities reaching out to each other, building understanding with each other. That kind of initiative needs support as well, including financial support. So I think it's about finding your place in it, and maybe for us as Canadians, it's recognizing. And this isn't always the case with mass atrocity situations in our world. This is one where Canada actually does have some influence. We have significant influence, a very close relationship with the Israeli government, for instance. That's not always the case there's a horrific conflict playing out in Sudan right now. Neither of the parties to that conflict, whether it be the Sudanese government or the militia group, the Rapid Support Forces, none of them care that much about what Ottawa has to say to them about anything, right? So there it's harder to find that leverage. But here we've got leverage. And beyond leverage, we have things that are troubling. We know that there are even arms sales from Canada still going to the Israeli government, et cetera. There are economic dealings between the two countries which may be benefiting some of the illegality of what's happening, et cetera. So this is one where I think we as Canadians can, you don't need to feel overwhelmed by this is big and global and who am I. You can focus your efforts on, okay, I'm Canadian. Canada has a role to play here, and how can I use my voice to shape that?
That was our interview with international human rights lawyer and Massey lecturer, Alex Neve.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at a new building being built for the St. George Animal Shelter.
We feel that an investment in our shelter isn't just about saving animals, it's about strengthening the fabric of our community, one adoption at a time.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We're going to St. George now for some positive news, emphasis on the paw. The St. George Animal Shelter is constructing a new building because it has outgrown the space it is currently using at the St. George Veterinary Hospital.
And this has a lot to do with also St. John being at capacity in neighboring cities. So I think that they're taking in more animals, not just in our region, but potentially in the urban areas as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think shelters across the country you will hear about are either at capacity or over capacity. And this is both stray animals, abandoned animals, or surrendered animals. So the difference is that abandoned means they've been left somewhere and they need to be rescued by this organization or another. And there are several volunteer organizations that do that work, or surrendered, which means that they've been brought in by their owner because they can no longer care for the pet. And so they've been taking from St. John. The Charlotte County SPCA also takes from them, who also takes from St. John. And when Lucas Kohler was here, our reporter for CHCO, he actually talked to the Charlotte County SPCA about how over capacity they were for a very long time.
It's quite sad, but also I think you see people rise to the occasion. We have so many incredible volunteers throughout our region who are both at the animal shelter in St. George and at the SPCA in Charlotte County. I was actually with Lynn Nye yesterday for a segment for a Good Day from the Bay, but I'm going to keep you in suspense about that. She's a volunteer there and a pet photographer. That's what I'll say. That's your one hint. But there are amazing people in our community that do the work, but they're still looking for donations to ensure that this is a reality. So I'm going to read the email address right now if you'd like to send an e-transfer at stgeorge.animalshelter@gmail.com. It takes a village. We always say that. We know the reality is it takes a county, and they do incredible work. I know in St. Andrews we don't have an animal shelter, so think about that. Just on this peninsula, animals here go to both of those places as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So what they presented to Eastern Charlotte Council, and their ask, although there was nothing specific, like no monetary amount provided in that presentation, and council didn't actually ask any questions, so it will likely come back to council at another point. But they've asked them to help support with operational costs. So covering the fees for spay and neutering, vaccinations, keeping the lights on. She said, building the building is one challenge. keeping it open and keeping the lights on is another. So that was the impetus behind the presentation. So it was interesting to hear her. I really think this is a great thing that they're doing. And Dr. Melanie Egan, who is the veterinarian at St. George the St. George Veterinary Clinic, donated 14 acres or 5.6 hectares if you're Canadian, to have that building erected just to the side of the clinic.
Okay, she definitely loves animals. She's a lovely person, and I really appreciate what she's done for animals in our region. And, you know, it factors into things like when we're looking at the cost of living. These are realities we're facing now. And when you talk to animal shelters, some people just can't even afford their pets anymore. So think of that factor. I can't imagine having to think about my pet as something I couldn't afford anymore. So that's another factor of why we're seeing this population growth at these shelters. It's just become too costly, and they even have sometimes people feeling like they have to abandon their pets on the doorstep. Sometimes even things like food being the cost that it is now. It's just something people can't afford. So there are many things behind the scenes that are reasons for this, and so we appreciate these initiatives and the volunteers that make it reality. But again, they're calling on the community to be a part of this. So I think if you can give, please do. If you can volunteer, that's another option as well.
Yeah, and they're also looking for foster families, because what helps reduce that overcapacity is if the pets can go to a foster family, they can go to a home until they're ready to be adopted. We're going to look ahead now because we've got a busy couple of weeks ahead.
We do have a busy couple of weeks. I think I will be checking out the County Moose in St. Stephen at the Garsland Civic Center. I'm very excited to go tape this segment. I know that we were originally supposed to have 2 NCDC teams here in Charlotte County, one in Eastern Charlotte, one in St. Stephen. Now we have the one team in St. Stephen for the whole county to get behind, rebranded the County Moose. So I'm going to meet the new coach. Very excited, and hopefully see some of the players as they arrive to our community. And again, they're looking for billets as well. So we will keep you in the loop on that front. Also next week, though, the Terry Fox Run. So I got to sit down with Carol Baker, who is 88 years old, looks fabulous, still does the walk, and she was here to inspire other people from Charlotte County to get involved in the Terry Fox Run. So I'll have more on that early next week.
Absolutely, and we will continue our coverage of the municipal plan. We're going to attend both meetings at Bayside and Shamcook, which are on the September 10th and 11th. I'm going to remind you again, September 10th and 11th, they're from 6 to 8 p.m. The Bayside one is at the Bayside Community Hall at 3049 Highway 127. And the Shamcook one is at the Atlantic Salmon Federation Nature Center. So those are the 2 in-person ones. There is a virtual one as well on September 17th, same time, 6 to 8 p.m. And it is virtual. You can register at www.townofstandrews.ca. So we're going to be continuing our coverage with that. We also have council meetings coming up throughout the next couple of weeks. I'm actually off on Friday of next week to head to a meeting with the Canadian Association of Journalists, as I'm the National Director for Atlantic Canada.
I know, we're so proud of you holding that position right here at CHCO and The Courier. So I look forward to hearing what you talk about with other journalists across the country. It'll be a fun conversation when you get back from that as well. But you're still here all next week. We are back into the swing of things after Labor Day. I love it because I don't have to wait in line for coffee anymore. So exciting. These are the little things. You see the leaves falling, and in St. Andrews that means less light ups too, because a lot of the summer vacationers are not here in the same capacity. So it has lightened things around the community.
I can't wait to find parking at the grocery store. I'm so excited. You wouldn't think that would be something that would be exciting, but it certainly is. And we love the tourists that come here. Jokes aside, we're happy to have them, but it's certainly an exciting time for locals.
Well, you've done a full year here now, so I could officially make you a local. You've experienced the winter that is Charlotte County. Now I think you understand why it's my favorite time of year.
Yeah, I mean, from September to December, a little bit into January, because my birthday is in January. That is my peak time, because I love the fall. I love Halloween. I love Christmas. Christmas is my favorite time of year. And obviously my birthday, even though I'm getting older. Yeah, it's my favorite time of year. So I'm excited to experience it here as a full-time resident, and hopefully I'll be able to join you on Christmas committee, and we're talking about some exciting things. So
exciting things. Oh, and I should say though, before we get out of September though, Comedy Fest next week at Kira Amphitheater. Jonathan Britton and I, you might know him as one of our hosts at TV Big O. He's very beloved. He's also my co-host on Good Day from the Bay. We sat down with Brent Butt of Corner Gas fame, star and creator of Corner Gas. He is headlining Comedy Fest September 12th and 13th. I think he performs on the 13th this Saturday. Can't wait to meet him in person. We sat down with him virtually from his home in Vancouver to talk about coming to the Maritimes, to talk about making jokes about small town life. That's what he does. Anyone who's watched Corner Gas knows that, but I'm so excited to see how he interprets life here in the Maritimes and then brings it to the stage. We know he can take a joke, so I'm excited to hear what he brings.
thanks for watching This Week Uncut. We'll see you next week. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.